So what is scanning once again? What are the types of scanning? These will be most likely on the exam. Then security universities, specific scanning methodology. How do we find first, remember the order, live systems, then ports. Then we start looking for services, identifying services and operating systems. Then we start looking for vulnerabilities, right? We'll look at some of the different scanning tools. We'll go into how do vulnerability assessment tools work. How would you do it if you had to do it manually by grabbing banners? And this is kind of painstaking, tedious work, but then comparing the versions that you see in the banners against vulnerable versions that you can find on secunia.com, right? And then you'd have to go and actually look for exploit files or scripts that you could use to exploit that. OS fingerprinting, drawing diagrams, using proxies and anonymizers, right? And then some of the countermeasures to protect you against scanning and enumeration. These are the steps once again, so you see this slide repeated a lot. These are our three phases. We prepare to do the scanning, we do the scans, and then we create our conclusions as a result of the analysis of those scans, right? So we do planning, we do information gathering, and then we do our reporting. There's all different types of scans. Remember the question about which of these is not a formal terminology for a scan. So we've got network scanning, we've got port scanning, we've got vulnerability scanning here. So we can look for targets of evaluation, specific IP addresses, operating system, services available, architecture. These are the three types. Remember on that question, what was the type that was not one of these? That was the target. But we do use the terminology target. That's the object of our scan, right? So we're trying to elicit a response, then enumerate to get more in depth. If we can get accounts, if we can get, file shares, etc. Sometimes you're not always able to get that stuff. It's often a lot harder than it looks. It can take you days or weeks to get information out. So first you try to do anything that's open and public. You try to do anything that's passive where you can just get information coming to you. But then you need to go into active information gathering if you're allowed, right? Hackets will begin by using tools such as Nmap. So they're sending packets to map open ports and applications. Nmap has lots of different features in it. It's like a Swiss Army knife, right? So our first scanning goal is to find live systems. Then after that, so we can do that with a ping scan or one of the alternatives, a TCP ping, an ARP ping, etc. Then we can try to do and find active, open, closed, or filtered ports. We can do an OS identification, also known as fingerprinting. And we can get the IP address of the target. The old-fashioned way to scan for ports on a system is a TCP full connect scan. It does the full three-way handshake, right? It sends a SYN packet, it gets back a SYN and an ACK, which tells you that, yes, this port is open, right? They sent me a SYN and an ACK, therefore they're going through the second phase of the three-way handshake, and I'm supposed to finish that by sending an ACK. And if I'm doing a full TCP connect, I send them an ACK, and then I want to close the connection, so I'll usually send them a reset after that, right? And that'll cause them to go shut down the connection. However, by completing the loop, what happens? The danger is they've seen me, they see me open up a connection, and they log that. Most web servers create log files, right? And they'll log my IP address in there and say, yep, he connected to us. So they know that I connected to them, and also that I really didn't ask for a web page or anything. I just was interested in whether the port was open. So that by itself is somewhat suspicious, right? If somebody connects to you and they don't actually do a GET command or a POST command, one of the HTTP verbs, you're like, why is this person interested in me? Why are they doing something non-standard here? So, and I wrote one of the first TCP full connect scans, back in the early 90s, 1991 or so, called Probe TCP ports, and I wrote a UDP one. Now UDP doesn't have a full connection, right? It's not connection oriented. So in order to not get logged in their log files, in order to fly under the radar, so to speak, what do people do to be more stealthy? They just send the SYN packet. They get back what from the other side if the port's open? SYN ACK. And they don't follow through. They don't send the final ACK, right? The third part of the three-way handshake. What happens? What's that connection? What's it called? half open, right? It's not all the way open yet. You'll also see it called a waiting to be established connection or half established connection. It hasn't been fully established. Eventually, they'll time out. Now, they usually will not log this in their web server logs, but they can, these days, being very sophisticated, still see these type of attacks and classify them as what? A SYN scan, or somebody's sending me SYNs and they're not following through with it, so IDSs can find that.
So what you're saying is IDSs can detect SYN scans and they are doing it, so it's not as stealthy.
It's not as stealthy as it might be, yes. People, you have to be pretty alert for it and differentiate this traffic from their standard traffic, and you differentiate it by the fact that they don't follow through with the ACK. Say, okay, I think somebody's SYN scanning me because they're sending SYNs to all of my IP addresses in this range, and they're never following them through with the, the ACK in order to close the three-way handshake.
So it's not at the application level?
Correct. The application, it's just sitting there and waiting, and it's never actually been notified by the TCP layer that anybody's there.
That's what people typically want.
It doesn't get woken up yet. Okay? And here they do usually send a reset to clear out that half-open connection. They don't have to. But resets will also sometimes cause problems by themselves. So here's an example of stealth scanning, right? This is our client, or scanner in this case. This is our web server. So the scanner computer A sends over a SYN packet, 192.168.1.3. Notice these are both on the same subnet, right? Sends it over from some high port number, 2171. It's sending it to what port? What port are they checking out? 25, SMTP. Email, right? The email server listens at that port. What does the server do? In step 2, sends back the SYN and then the ACK to me. And then instead of me following through with the last part of the three-way handshake, instead of sending an ACK, I send them a what? Reset, go away. I don't really want to follow through with this, right? They may or may not log that. Their IDS certainly can see that because usually they get to look at all the traffic coming in and out. UDP scanning. UDP is not connection-oriented, right? It's connection-less. So it's a little more difficult to do scanning, and it's not always conclusive because UDP services don't have to respond to you, right? It's very hard to tell if there's anything listening there. Sometimes we actually have to provoke a response. We have to send it a DNS query to see if it's actually there. We have to send it an SNMP query or try something to see if at an application level, layer 7, it'll respond to us. We can't always rely on the UDP layer or the ICMP layer to tell us if a UDP port is opening, right? So the basic way to do this is to send them an empty UDP datagram, a 0, data payload UDP. So it just consists of the UDP headers, right? If the port's listening, the service should send back an error message or ignore it, right? If the port's closed, most operating systems will send you back ICMP port unreachable, telling you it's not open, but not all. Neither UDP packets nor the ICMP errors are guaranteed to arrive. UDP is a best effort, right? Not guaranteed delivery mechanism. So oftentimes, the UDP scanner needs to send multiple packets and check the results of those packets coming back. So it'll send a UDP empty packet. It'll wait a certain amount of time. Then it'll send again and it'll wait. And then based on, let's say it sends 4 or 5 packets, it's going to make a decision about what? Whether or not it thinks that port is open or closed or not. It may say it's inconclusive. It can't really find out. You have to be slow in some cases because some machines are going to put in rating limits on ICMP messages. So some Linuxes have gotten really smart about people scanning them and about denial of service attacks like UDP floods, SYN floods, or ICMP floods, et cetera. So sometimes they'll start rate limiting. They'll say detected UDP flood or detected ICMP flood, rate limiting, and it'll start slowing down the connection. UDP scanning isn't pointless. You can actually find some UDP services, usually in specific ranges. So if you know what you're looking for, you'll narrow down that target range. You'll look at 111, for example, for RPC info. You can find a number of RPC services on most Unix machines. The Sun RPC services, around 32,000 or so, just up above that.
What percentage of people are using the UDP versus?
Very few people, except for professionals that are working on jobs, do the UDP scans. The hackers rarely use them. They mostly use the TCP scans. The TCP scanning is much more reliable than UDP scanning. UDP scanning takes a lot more patience, a lot more expertise to make sense of the outcome. And there are organizations where they actually filter all UDP. It turns out that there's very little UDP that's actually necessary on the internet to get work done. You can get most things done on the internet with just TCP, right? Email, web-based services, even SSH and Telnet and all those are all TCP-based. UDP-based services, DNS, that's the one it's really required for. You shouldn't run SNMP over the internet. You can run it on your local enterprise network, but don't let it leak out. And there's a bunch of streaming services for music and movies and things like that that can use UDP, but a lot of them can use TCP instead. So it's not really necessary. A lot of sites will filter all ICMP, they'll filter all UDP, since it's not necessary for them to function on the internet. They can function in the absence of those two protocols.